is 4 countries in an alliance. The United States, not the way it's on this map right now. I'll get to that. United States of America, Russia, no longer known as the Soviet Union. That's no thing. China and India. These 4 countries working together will have the power and the political will and have the tradition, have this concept of themselves as great nations, to be able to get rid of globalism, get rid of the empire, smash the empire, get it off the back of the world, and do what's needed, which is to stop the payment on these debts to these swindlers, stop the bailouts all over the world, and have each country be a sovereign nation, and build up manufacturing, build up science, and do what's needed to get us out of this terrible crash that's going on faster and faster. It's not stopping. It's getting worse. And we're going to have to change the world in that fashion. I'll get, in the end, I'm going to get to some of the things, just a brief summary of what has just happened to start this alliance, which is the idea of Lyndon LaRouche. It's underway right now in Russia and China and some other countries. Just as an example, one feature is the Russians have announced that American investors are interested in building a tunnel from Alaska to Russia to allow high-speed trains to go across the Pacific Ocean and to unite 50% or 75% of the world's surface by high-speed trains. Now, when I say Russia and China and India and the United States of America, to some of you, perhaps the older people here, you have a memory of enemies of the United States. We're talking about allying with not just these countries, but really with Japan, Southeast Asia, the other countries, allying with Iran, allying with Iraq. But you can't just do that one country at a time. You need the force, the real political power and population power of these great nations. But wasn't Russia our enemy under communism? China, our enemy under communism, according to the story that you're told, right? Japan, our enemy from World War II. Vietnam, our enemy from a later war. Korea, North Korea, our enemy. They're still blazing that in the headlines. All right, all these enemies. Germany will play a key role in this because they have technology that needs to be part of building up this new world and getting us off of the global. These countries were our allies. And we brought to the world from the United States modern times and what it means to be a nation in modern civilization. We brought out to them the idea that a country should have science power and should have its own government taking care of its own people and using the minerals and the labor power and the creativity of their people in cooperation with a modern world to build up their own country, not just be robbed. That was our idea. You didn't hear about it. You probably didn't hear about it in school. I'm going to go back to how we got to here, in a positive sense and in a negative sense. Here we are at the precipice, because we could go forward into this kind of world that takes us to the space program again. It takes us to the most beautiful accomplishments that our children can be part of and be excited about. Or takes us straight to hell, which is where we're headed right now, under this current regime. Continuation, Bush, Obama, boom. In 1846, this was the United States. just inside these markers. This was the United States. Let me take this British flag off here.
Please.
This is British territory. It wasn't called Canada, it was just British. Some part of it was called Canada, but it was all British territory. This was controlled by Russia, called Alaska now. This was Mexico. We already had Texas in the United States at that time. But California, Nevada, Arizona, this area was part of Mexico. And this area here, the entire Pacific Coast area of North America, was a no man's land. We called it the Oregon Territory. And it was mainly controlled by a British military and commercial operation known as the Hudson's Bay Company. They had as their troops Iroquois and other Indians that they used, who were in effect slaves to the British Empire, and they actually were using them as one Indian tribe against another for the purposes of preventing any human development of this area. In 1846, this is, now, we're going back 15 years before the beginning of the Civil War. The southern part of the United States had slavery. The northern part did not. Slavery left over from the British Empire. Cotton from the south was exported to England, most of it. Worked up into clothing and sold back to the United States. Worked up by virtual slaves in British factories. And there was a debate going on in the United States in 1846. Shall we go to war with Mexico so that we could spread slavery down there? The president, James Polk, was a slave owner from Tennessee who liked to whip his slaves. A very disgraceful man. He enjoyed it. He thought it benefited him to be whipped. He was the president. There was another proposal that said, let us send people out here to Oregon Territory and let us take that and populate that, and let's buy California in this area from Mexico. And we'll have the United States of America here and Mexico here, side by side. John Quincy Adams. How many people have heard of John Quincy Adams? He was president of the United States, and then in the 1820s, and then after that, he became a congressman. He wanted to keep fighting after he lost re-election. He was the leader of the House of Representatives. He didn't have the title, I am a leader. He just was the leader because he was the moral leader. This is what he said. We had an agreement going back to the time when he had been Secretary of State, where the British and the United States agreed that this didn't belong specifically to either country, but that people could go there from either country. And if you went there from the United States, you would be destroyed by the Hudson's Bay Company, by Indian attacks that they were running, or by, they had a monopoly of all the tools. They wanted no agriculture, nothing. So this wasn't working at all. They didn't want any settlement there. They wanted to keep it as a no man's land. Adams said in the Congress, I would press a resolution giving the notice this day. That means giving notice to the British. This is over. It was part of the treaty that we had to give them a notice of some months before we said we're not in this treaty anymore. I would give notice this day. He said, it would only be saying to Great Britain, after negotiating 20 years about this matter, we do not choose to negotiate any longer. We shall take possession of what is our own. And then, if to settle the question of what is our own, you wish to negotiate, we'll negotiate as long as you please. We may negotiate after we take possession. Much laughter. These are the records of the House of Representatives. Much laughter. This is the military way of doing business. Increased merriment. And then he talked about how, I'm not going to read this part, but he talked about how the Southern representatives in Congress had been big tough talkers about, let's take Texas and put it in the Union. And we need to take other areas from Mexico. We need to beef up our army. We're going to take on Mexico. Mexico was a poor, backward country that had been under the Spanish and not been developed at all. They were weak. And so he said, oh, you talk tough. Well, now we're talking about something that we need and taking on the biggest military power in the world, Britain, with the warships. Serious business. We just had a war with them. It was a stalemate, the War of 1812. So he says, if Britain chose to take it as an act of hostility on our part, and Britain starts a war, we hope there might be but one party. The war would then have less of those terrorists, which his friend from South Carolina has just discovered. He says, if a war shall come, which God forbid, the whole country will have but one heart and one united hand. And of this I am very sure, that in that case, Great Britain will no longer occupy Oregon, nor anything else north of the Canada line. In other words, he's proposing that we go totally into the West Coast, into this territory. If that means a war with the British, they're going to lose the rest of it. Out of here. And then you have side by side a powerful republic up here that speaks English, and a powerful sister republic, or could be developed as a powerful republic, that speaks Spanish, side by side, neighbors and friends. But we have nothing in common with the British Empire. That's the proposal. You all know what happened? What happened was our government under these traitors said, no, we're in with the British. We're going to go and bully the Mexicans and try to spread slavery. So the same people who gave us the Civil War later on, people from South Carolina and the Southern Confederates. All right, so now, who's John Quincy Adams? When he was Secretary of State, he made this agreement with the British in 1818. He had no power to do anything with it right then. He was a very small country. He also made the Monroe Doctrine under the Secretary of State, under President Monroe. He became President of the United States. And what I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to show you here, is that what we did then, up to the present, when we did as our nation calls us to do, as our Constitution, as our heritage calls us to do, as our revolution calls us to do, is we shifted the whole human race out of an Atlantic control by the old European empires. And we said we want a world that's oriented Look at this map. What's in the middle of this map?
Great Britain.
Well, Africa's there physically, but there's a line. You know where the zero line of the world is? The longitude zero. It goes right down here. So anything west of here goes up in longitude. Anything east of here goes up eastward. Why is that the zero line? Is that like the equator? No. Is it in the middle of anything? No. It goes through London. They made the map. They made the line. Right? We are the center of the universe. How come the map is like this? Okay, there's most of the land. But what we're proposing and what we did as a country when we landed here, people landed here from Europe, was to move west, to develop relations with the other former colonies, and then have peaceful and productive relations with the countries on the other side of the Pacific, so that the power of the world shifts to the Pacific. Out with the empires, all of them, no empires. And that's what we did. And what you read about in school is that this was an evil project. You're taught that the project to develop the United States and end the empires in the world was the epitome of evil, called manifest destiny. And everything that the United States did wrong under control of traders or British agents or slave owners or whoever it was, dope pushers and Boston, whoever did something wrong, according to what you've been taught, that is the United States. Murdering Indians, enslaving blacks, whatever was wrong, that's the United States. The Declaration of Independence, meaningless. Anything else we did accomplish, like building factories that had high wages, meaningless. That's wrong too. It pollutes the air. All of these arguments, people have been fed increasingly, especially since the United States, so that you have no map in your mind to orient to the new world that we have to create, that LaRouche is proposing and that we're putting into motion. What's the background of this? That has been the project of the United States from the beginning. You haven't heard about it. That's what we're discussing. When President John Quincy Adams took over in 1825 as president, he used a law that had just been passed by Congress to order the Army, U.S. Army engineers from West Point, to begin planning the railroads of the United States. We had no railroads. And they planned about 60 railroads. And all the railroads were given money from government, from state, federal, or local government. There was no purely private railroad. This is the project of the country. What happened out here? A man that you might have heard of, or probably didn't hear of. Anybody hear the name Marcus Whitman? Ever hear of him? No. There's a statue of him in the U.S. Capitol. He's a missionary. He went out to Oregon. It was Oregon Territory. In this time when it was under the control of the British Hudson's Bay Company. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, let's take 1 minute. And everybody in the room turn off their cell phone. Okay? You know how to do that? You know how to do it?
Now in church.
Everybody turn them off. Okay? They put them on no bring or whatever.
That's one T or two T's for Whitman?
W-H-I-T-M-A-N. Marcus M-A-R-C-U-S. Here's what happened. Here's how he got out there. Because he's the one who changed the situation, really. He started the whole thing. You've all heard of the Lewis and Clark expedition? And the United States bought from France the middle of the country, this part here. And it was very undefined out here. President Jefferson, who put up the U.S. money for that, sent these two explorers, Lewis and Clark, out from Missouri all the way out to the Columbia River and to the Pacific Coast to see what's out there, to try to develop relations with the Indians, see what's happening, and so forth. Later on, that was in the early 1800s. After that, we had a war with England. In 1832, a group of Nez Perce Indians came to St. Louis, and they met Mr. Clark of the Lewis and Clark Expedition. He was an old man at that time. And they told him, "We want teachers. You told us we could have teachers on the expedition. We never got them. All we got was the Hudson's Bay Company and a bunch of very strange Catholics called Jesuits who seem to be gun runners. And that doesn't seem to be what we were confused about that being the Christian religion. And gun runners for the British, even though they're French. Right? So we want teachers to teach us agriculture, because what the British are doing there is killing off fur-bearing animals, giving everybody whiskey and guns, and we have a perpetual state of war, and we're about to starve. We don't know agriculture. We've heard that people who are not white people in the past built cities. We were told that by your expedition. We were told that in Indian legends as well. We were told that there were cities down here. That our people, our own people, built cities, had astronomy. We've got to get science. We've got to get agriculture. When you send people, when you send missionaries, the missionaries were the ones who did this kind of teaching. And so the notice of this Nez Perce delegation in 1832 to St. Louis to Mr. Clark spread through Christian circles in the United States and through political circles, and caused a great sensation. And Marcus Whitman went out there with some other people, and I want to give you some idea of the conditions. Whitman, by the way, said, you know what we should do? We should have a kind of a Pony Express message system. There was no telegraph yet. And this, on an Oregon Trail, let's have an Oregon Trail and a Pony Express, and this should be policed by Indians. Because, he said, they would be able to break up the Indian raids on travelers. Because all Indian raids are led by subversive renegade white men.
I heard that. That's my first time hearing that.
Marcus Whitman's statue as a founder of Oregon is not the only statue of him. The head of the Hudson's Bay Company has a statue from Oregon too, as the father of Oregon. McLaughlin, Dr. McLaughlin. The Jesuits had a relation with the Iroquois Indians who were out here, and this went all throughout Canada. The Iroquois were set up as a master race by the British and by the Jesuits for the British. And they spread a pagan religion among the Iroquois Indians. They did not convert them to Christianity. They didn't build churches out in the various areas. They used them as an instrument to set up a confederation of different tribes under the control of this British-controlled Iroquois operation. And this pagan party was operating out here also. among the Indians that were on the West Coast. At the same time this was going on, there were Cherokee Indians here on the East Coast, in Georgia primarily. And they had already an arrangement with the U.S. government to have teachers there. It was set up by George Washington. And we had teachers there from the beginning of the country. More and more it was operating by the time of, when Adams was president in the 1820s. These were missionaries, but their primary goal wasn't just teaching the gospel. Can you teach the gospel to somebody who can't read? No, they're not operational. What does it mean? They're just reciting something. Right? It's not something that they know themselves. So you have to teach agriculture, you have to teach astronomy, you have to give some sense of reality and practical naturalism, or else you just use it. There's a big fight about this inside the church. Which should we do? Just spread the gospel, or absolutely have the power. Is everybody entitled to that power or not? No. The other side didn't say they're not entitled to it. They said let's kill them. Or enslave them. That's so the Georgia people, the Georgia leaders said we got to put these Cherokees out and get them. Right? So what happened in 1843, Marcus Whitman, who had set up in what's now Walla Walla, Washington, went back and led 900 settlers across the Rocky Mountains in covered wagons, which was impossible to do, and he did it anyway. That increased the population of settlers from 300 to 1,200. And it was that incredible feat in 1843 that led a guy named James Polk, who was put up as an idiot candidate for president. He said, well, people are all excited about Oregon, so I'm going to have a slogan when I'm running for president. And I'm going to call it 54-40 or fight. Ever hear that? Yeah. That refers to the latitude. Here's the 50th latitude. Where's 54? Here's 60. It's right here where Alaska starts. In other words, he's saying we're going to take the whole West Coast for the United States. No British. That was his campaign slogan. He got elected. Or got elected like Bush got elected. Didn't get elected, but he was given the election, right? Against Henry Clay in 1844. So you have this debate going on in the Congress. So what happened? The British responded to John Quincy Adams' speech in the Congress. What do you think they said? They weren't happy. I have here documents from the London Times and other British papers. And they go through his speech. They quote from his speech. They misquote him to a certain extent, but that's typical. But then they answered in an editorial in the London Times. How come you have to do that? They talked about America's preparations for war. We're building up, we're doing things in Norfolk and elsewhere to build up warships. The war with England. And this is the London Times on the Oregon question. Here's what they said. They quote John Quincy Adams. Exhortations to war and exulting predictions that in the event of of a war, England would lose not only Oregon, but all that she now possesses north of those latitudes. Such words from such a man will thrill in the ears of thousands. Because they knew that this was a man who was a patriot leader, who knew who they were, and that he was part of a group of people in this country that continues up to the present day with the root. This is people who knew that they were fighting face to face with the enemy. Now, we readily admit that in the Democratic Assembly of a Republican state, and temptations to exaggerated or menacing language are very great at all times. And in times of international differences, almost irresistible. You'll find legislators telling the people it is their destiny to commit a great injustice, that they don't fear the odds of a tussle with Great Britain. But, are you prepared for war? Now, they're talking to the United States and the U.S. government. Are you prepared for war? Have you calculated its costs, its consequences, its calamities? Even supposing that in the conflict which you provoke, a success greater than you expect comes to you. That you plant your victorious flag on the two banks of the Columbia. Columbia River goes between what is now Oregon and Washington, right there. They didn't plan on us having anything. Right? Supposing you do have that, what's going to happen? Or that you advance your flag to the shores of the Hudson Straits. Hudson Bay, right here. What would you have gained? When we talk about how you'll become an empire, you'll topple. But if you fail, if New York is given to plunder, and Washington again beholds the English flag floating over her capital, remember the scenes of 1774? Will you reenact them? The country would suffer dreadfully in the attempt. We should lay our ships of war against the cities of your pride. You might destroy our merchant vessels, but we should devastate your provinces, despoil your towns. We might lay Washington in ashes. But could you invade England with effect? And what about a slave uprising that would kill all white people? Slaves are going to get you. This is the British response. Now, what do they propose instead?
This is the response to Anton.
This is a response to John Quincy Adams proposing to kick the British out of North America. What the British propose instead of that is that we should leave the West Coast, or a lot of it, to them, and leave them up here, and that we should go to war with Mexico to spread slavery. Because if the United States spreads slavery, then the slave system, which is controlled internationally by Britain, will completely destroy the United States. And that's the end of any problem. No republics anymore. If slavery spreads, you have no republic. Because slavery is a murder system. It's not a production system. You don't have a profit. Or the pirate goes to sea, puts money and buys a ship, and gets 20 times the value of the ship. Is that a profit? That's not a profit. Profit is when you produce more than you consume. People got money from it, but it was just by murdering people and ruining the soil. So they're proposing that we should destroy our friendship with other countries in the hemisphere and leave them in power. And that's what happened. May 13th, 1846, the President demanded the Congress declare war on Mexico. June 15th, 1 month later, we concluded a treaty with England, the Oregon Treaty, 1846. James Polk. We just launched an unlawful war against Mexico. Well, we could have bought California. And the treaty, what did the treaty do with England? Left them in control of all of this area. Look at the Canadian coins today. Who's on who's pictures on the coin? The Queen of England. They have to bow to the Queen. Still today. But I want you to see this so you get a sense of what went wrong here. What's this called? What's that part of Canada called? British Columbia. We gave that to them as a bargain. You can keep this. We'll just be confined to this lower area here. You can have a whole coast-to-coast colonial operation here, keeping us confined here, and you will bless us to destroy our relationship with our neighbors by going to war with them for the same purpose. That was the deal that was made. And of course, 15 years later, the people who made that deal made war on the United States, called the Secession. Right? Civil War. Same people. Same operation. Armed by the British. The next year, Marcus Whitman was murdered, assassinated. He and many other people in his mission by a group of Indians, Cayuse, who were told that he's a doctor teaching agriculture and science. They were told that he was poisoning them with measles. And one of the priests went in there. And by the way, the head of the Hudson's Bay Company was lost in that whole area of the world. Was himself a participant in this slavery operation. Very unusual for British. One of the man named Spaulding, who was a friend of Whitman, told the story to the Congress that the priests from this military operation, the British military, had gone to the Indians, taken them into Whitman's compound, and come out of there with a jar of liquid, saying, "Here, this is the poison that he's been giving you to give you measles." And there was a massacre. What was reported? That was reported. Just like the Lincoln assassination later was really reported. People knew this was a British operation. Congress published this. What do you know about it now? Why don't you go on? How about if you go on Wikipedia? That sound like a good plan? Learn something? Oh, what do they say? They quote a gentleman who says that this was a myth, and that the Marcus Whitman question is considered settled. That this was a myth, and they quote some guy around the time of Teddy Roosevelt, some student in the university, who says that Marcus Whitman didn't say that area. There was no result of it. It was what he did actually that brought all those people out there. So let's leave that for the time. What happened was we had a war with Mexico. Lincoln came into that Congress when John Quincy Adams was still in there as a congressman leading that. And Lincoln put the mustache on James Polk.
Somebody else we know.
That's right. He did, and he said, "Look, this war is a farce. This is. He showed that Polk was a liar. Polk had claimed the Mexican invasion in the U.S. Show us the spot where they did it."
Yeah, I was just going to say, was that the spot resolution?
Spot resolution. That's right. And in 1860, When Lincoln later ran for president of the United States, he put out a campaign autobiography, a short sketch of his life. And he said in that autobiography, the reason for the Mexican War was to cover up giving away the West Coast to the British. There were other missionaries at the time. The missionaries to the Cherokees were arrested by Georgia. Andrew Jackson refused to get them out of jail as the Supreme Court said that he should. And these Cherokees were murdered by being thrown out into the wilderness, 1,000 miles. So there were also missionaries that went to Hawaii and trained Sun Yat-sen, the later leader of China's revolution, in the American style, Lincoln style. Why is that important? Question. Look at this. What?
What's the difference between missionaries and espionage agents of the Republic?
Well, there were British missionaries, and there were a few missionaries under their control, like the missionaries who went to China.
I mean, our guys being agents of the revolution.
What's this? Who knows what this is?
British flag and something.
Yes, this is the flag of Hawaii. Now,
What? Still?
that's the flag of Hawaii right now.
They got a Union Jack on it.
They got a British flag right in the middle of it.
Obama's birthday.
So here's the problem. The British were operating here. What were they doing here? There's an island here called England. What are they doing over here? They want to make sure that the world is in a permanent state of war and despoilment. What happened at this time? The very time that we're trying to settle people in Oregon to get peace and development, get progress going on. The British had a war going on across the ocean. They're protecting it by some of their operations in Hawaii. And they had a war against China, 1840 to 42, to sell them opium, and the Chinese resisted. They bombed their cities, raped their women, and forced them to give up Hong Kong and to accept the opium addiction of their people. That same time, 1846, while John Quincy Adams is talking, one of the men that he got going as an army engineer to build trains in America, George Washington Whistler, was over in Russia building the first railroad of Russia, the American Army Railroad, from Moscow to St. Petersburg. We started their railroad right then. Another guy in Thailand, and Dan Bradley, I wrote about him. It's called Siam. He was a great man. He worked with the king, kicked the British out of it. The king was a genius, not the king. So, what else were the British doing? They had British troops in Ireland at that time, guarding the food in Ireland so that it could be exported from Ireland while the people were starving at the top of it.
Same thing we did during the French Revolution.
So you're talking about a world conflict about whether we're going to survive or not. The Congress that backed Marcus Whitman also passed a law saying let's set up a telegraph and have the government pay for it. Okay. All right. So anyway, they had another war, by the way. England and France went to war again against China, 1857. More Opium War. And in that war, the British said, okay, why don't you take over Indochina, take over Vietnam, France, so we can have poison, opium, genocide. That's who we're fighting against. That's who took the side of the slave owners in our Civil War. We won that war, that Civil War. Slavery ended. It was ended by the U.S. Army, including 200,000 black people who were in the Army. And we built a transcontinental railroad paid for by the U.S. government that went all the way to that West Coast. That went out to the San Francisco area. We were in the process of building another one out to Seattle. And we wanted to develop this area as a springboard to for South America and for the Asia place to work with Russia, with China, with India. We had a celebration in 1876 in Philadelphia. The great centennial, 100 years from Declaration of Independence. And at that World's Fair, the biggest one ever put on, we exhibited our machinery and the effects of high wages. Was that successful? Is it successful to pay people a lot to be a worker? Yeah. That's the most successful system. The system we have now, it doesn't work at all. Now the idea is that a country is supposed to get the cheapest labor it can. And most of the people should work to make egotistical pleasures for a few billionaires. Insane. Completely insane. Well, we had a high wage system by tariff and other things. And at that World's Fair in Philadelphia, 1876, the image of Confucius and Muhammad were up on top, on display, and right in the middle of the whole machinery. This is our display. You know, it was a. I don't know that it would be an image of the prophet, but rather some depiction, like could be a star, could be whatever. You know what I mean? In other words, it was something respectful that showed our intentions. And we had, at that time, a very rapid outreach to the rest of the world. And since we won the Civil War, we now had the power in our government. Without slave owners in Congress, and we could do what we wanted, with the power to build up industry real fast. One of the people that displayed there was Edison. There was an experiment right after that was carried out at the University of Pennsylvania, where Thomas Edison put on a display of his work for Henry Carey, the economist, and a professor from the Franklin Institute. And that professor then worked with Edison over the next few months to develop electricity for the whole world. That was the plan. And he started the electricity in the world. Started the development of power stations, electric light meters, and so on. There wasn't any electricity. So this is the kind of thing we were doing. And we were reaching out to these other countries. In that period right after our Civil War, 1870, Japan had people loyal to Philadelphia economists, Lincoln's economists, nationalist economists. Japanese students overthrew the old system instead of a modern government. As I said, Sun Yat-sen was in China. They didn't succeed for a while. There was a leader named Renata, R-E-N-A-D-E, in India, the judge who wrote, he was the founder of Indian nationalism under the British Empire. And he was a follower of the American nationalist Blaine. So we were spreading this. We worked with the Russians. We had a plan. We built Russian warships in the Philadelphia harbor, and we had submarines operating. They were under experiment. They were tested in New York Harbor in 1880. This was done by the Irish Underground Organization based in Philadelphia. And the plan was to have a military combination of Russia, the United States, and an Irish uprising that would completely smash the British. At that point, the American president was murdered, Garfield, and the Tsar, Alexander II, our allies, today. So this is a back and forth struggle. We're trying to spread science, power, industry, high wages. The British are trying to do what? Do what? It gets even worse. A few days ago, there was an op-ed in the New York Times by a guy named James Bradley. This was the day before Pearl Harbor Day, December 6th. And he said that, who was responsible for Pearl Harbor? You might have heard some populists or right-wingers say that Franklin Roosevelt was responsible. He said, well, I looked into that, and I found that it was Roosevelt who was responsible, but not Franklin Roosevelt. It was Teddy Roosevelt. Well, how could that be? Teddy Roosevelt was president back at the beginning of the 20th century, and Pearl Harbor was in 1941. Well, he said Teddy Roosevelt worked with the Japanese to get them to be a race empire, to invade China, to go to war with Russia. And in 1902, the British made a treaty, a military alliance with Japan. Yeah.
Maybe a little ahead on what we can do for war. Okay. But I've heard say that over the years before we went to war with Japan, I heard say that we sold them guns. Did we really sell any guns?
We think of it this way. In the 19th century, 1870s, 1880s, we were the ones that assisted Japan to modernize their country, to become a powerful country, to get arms, to get industry, to get science, to get all the capabilities that they needed to defend themselves against who? The British that were raging all around Asia, spreading opium and conflict. We wanted to have allies who were modern countries. We did the same thing in Russia. Was the Tsar a good system? No. Are there any real good governments that you know of in the world? Not really. There aren't that many good governments. We had a constitution that's totally unique. But our idea was, when we sent people in the 1850s to Japan on ships, Commodore Perry, and on those ships, we had guns on the ships, but we didn't shoot at them. We said, you got to take notice to it. We've got a problem. We've got some looters and murderers running around and dope pushers. On our ship, we have telegraphs. We have machines. We have trains, whole trains, 1/4 scale model. Take these things, telescopes. Join us in the modern world. We'll help you get going as a power. We want you to be powerful. Unheard of today, right? Oh, Iran, my God, they're trying to do whatever, right? Yeah. We were the ones who brought the nuclear science to our man under Iran. Okay, so this guy, here's the point. This Bradley, he's the son of one of the guys that raised the flag on Iwo Jima. And you had that movie by Clint Eastwood, Flags of Our Fathers. He wrote the book Flags of Our Fathers. This guy named Bradley. He wrote this op-ed in the New York Times. He has a book that I read. It's called The Imperial Cruise. It tells about how in 1905, Teddy Roosevelt, the president, sent a ship across the Pacific with his Secretary of War, Taft, and his daughter, the princess, Alice, the pretty girl. And they went across and they visited Japan, Korea, some parts of China, the Philippines. We had a war that Teddy Roosevelt himself was instigating. They took over the Philippines, took away from Spain. So this ship went and visited all these places and spread the doctrine from Teddy Roosevelt to the Japanese. You should take over the whole area on behalf of the alliance of the Whitmen and the honorary Aryans, Japanese. Now, this is a true story. Unfortunately, he hasn't got a clue about anything that comes before that. Who is Teddy Roosevelt? Where's this come from? How did Teddy Roosevelt become president?
McKinley was assassinated.
Because the president was murdered, William McKinley. In 1898, when McKinley was president, they gave him a map. The Army engineers gave him a map. They had planned with the South American countries 5,000 miles of railroads to totally unite the country. And we were giving the the steel from Philadelphia and the locomotives from Pennsylvania to build the Trans-Siberian Railway with the Russians. So we were doing that then. Well, what LaRouche wants to do right now. We were also Charles Flint from New York was planning tunnel. That time. Yeah, Bering Strait Tunnel. So he was murdered. Teddy Roosevelt takes over, his enemy. And he was vice president. Got forced onto the ticket by blackmail and Republicans in the 1900s. And he says we're going to introduce British methods here. Who is he? Well, here's an interesting part. I have a chapter in Treason about this. But let's get down to just one little point in this book by Bradley. Teddy Roosevelt had a professor at Harvard. His name was Chaitkin. No, his name was. I guess he wrote it. Yeah. His name was Shaler. Now this guy was a teacher of, I don't know what you call it, science, social science, anthropology, all of the above. He had just come back from England. He was an American, so-called. He had gone to England in the 1870s. Teddy Roosevelt was there in the late 1870s. And this guy, Shaler, had gone to England and had met with Thomas Huxley and with the Prince Edward Albert, who was later Edward VII, and met with the whole circle of Thomas Huxley, and who had just instituted a revolution in science. What was that revolution?
Darwinism.
Darwinism. What does that mean? What does that mean? When you, and this is, I have, this whole insight has been developed in a recent paper written by, hopefully will be in EIR soon, written by Paul Blumel, a brilliant guy out in a lot of our group out in the West Coast. You can prove from the record of geology that the years of the Earth are not as a literal meaning as I would say. Anybody who says that the world is 5,000 years old or 6,000 years old is just full. Science that was making profound leaps in the period from Kepler on, right into the 19th century. You have people like Pasteur, you have people like Taylor and Gauss. You have some Americans, like a man named Silliman and others. We're looking at how that changed in the world over the millennia, over the ages, over the millions and millions of years. How does that change guidance? How does that work? What are the laws of nature in nature that the Creator has put there as a dynamic? And it's not within some germplasm of each individual being. It's a very complex dynamic. You have the whole world developing first living things, and then animals, and then human beings with intelligence, and then act on nature. This is a fantastic multi-layered development of the world. That's evolution. That's real evolution. What did Darwin say that Huxley, this guy Thomas Huxley, picked up and said, okay, this is the new doctrine of the British Empire and of the world? What drives the entire universe is that God, or the Creator, we didn't believe in God, whatever set up this universe, did not make enough to keep the human race alive without war and oppression and imperialism. And that the way animals develop is just like the British Empire. You kill the weak, and then you survive. The strong survive by oppressing and eating the weak.
This is who?
This is Darwin and Huxley. And Huxley's the one who developed this into a whole imperial strategy.
Was Alice his brother?
Alice is his grandson. Alice and Julian Huxley. The whole gang of these people, they developed the idea of eugenics on this. And out of this, a cousin of Darwin is named Galton, who invented eugenics. It means good birth. You're good if your parents were wealthy and powerful. You're bad if you're poor. You deserve it. And you should kill off the poor people because they're an expense. And that was developed by Malthus, and he's the one who said that the reason people starve in India is because there's too many of them, not because the British stopped destroying food and made them grow opium.
Oh.
This is the whole idea of the total lie. What do we know for sure is the total dynamic of evolution? Well, that's still to be known. We know something of it. This is a fight for human knowledge that's going to be developed, and creationism, so-called, is really a very shallow. It's a farce. The British had an argument going on between fundamentalists who said the Bible tells us everything. Oh, which Bible? The Aramaic, Greek, English. Jesus spoke English, right? The Bible tells us everything in a literal record. You could believe that. Forget about the principle that God made man in his image. We're not going to talk about it. Just a literal formalism or imperialism and death. Those are your two choices. Ridiculous! That's not a debate. That's what you're given right now. That's what you're given right now. You have to be either a fundamentalist lunatic or you have to be an imperialist murderer. Why? That's not what created modern times. No imperialist lunatic ever invented anything useful. They never did any good to anybody. What the British do in India? Nothing. They murdered people. So, that's Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt embodied that entirely. I want to read you a quote from Teddy Roosevelt so you really get this. 2 years after he left the White House, Theodore Roosevelt attacked the feeble-minded American founding fathers. The word feeble-minded. And their Declaration of Independence. He wrote a book review of a book by the British race propagandist Houston Stuart Chamberlain. This book was called The Foundations of the 19th Century. And Teddy Roosevelt wrote, much that Chamberlain says regarding the prevalent loose and sloppy talk about the general progress of humanity, the equality and identity of races, and the like, is not only perfectly true, he says, but is emphatically worth considering by a generation accustomed as its forefathers to the preceding generations were accustomed to accept as true and useful, thoroughly pernicious doctrines brought by well-meaning and feeble-minded sentimentalists. In other words, he's saying, all men are created equal, that's feeble-minded. So he is attacking directly the existence of the United States. This was Adolf Hitler's favorite book, The Foundations of the 20th Century, written by a British. His image is on that, right? All right, so Teddy Roosevelt, how was he popular? He closed the West. He made war on Latin American countries. He got the Japanese into. He worked with the British to get the Japanese as an empire on the attack, rolling around. Well, why don't they attack Pearl Harbor? Right. Up through the time, the beginning of Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, we had only 2 war plans. One against England, one against war plan there, and one against there was a historian named Charles Beard, who wrote that the United States Constitution was a farce. It was Japanese warfare against China. He also said we should get into World War I on the side of the British. And then when World War II came, it was coming. He attacked Franklin Roosevelt and said, the Japanese invaders, let them do what they need to do. And he attacked Franklin Roosevelt. This guy, Beard, idolized Teddy Roosevelt. And many populists get their stuff from this guy. One of those people who is his get his whole point of view from him is a man named Howard Zinn, who wrote the so-called People's History of the United States. What does he say about the American Revolution? It's baloney. What does he say about Lincoln? He's a fraud. He's working for the corporation. Same thing with Franklin Roosevelt. He gets it from this race imperialist, Charles Beard. Almost here where we are. How many people have heard of Teapot Dome? This was when the president was Warren Harding in 1923. There was a scandal called the Teapot Dome scandal. That the dome is a geologic formation out west, where underneath that there is a reserve of petroleum. Now, we still have a petroleum reserve in the United States. In case of emergency. And there was a group of men around the president at that time who were patriots and they were associated with the Navy. And they wanted to use this petroleum reserve to build up the U.S. power to defend Hawaii and go against British operations in the Pacific Ocean. The President of the United States, Harding, associated with these men, died mysteriously, and all the men involved with this point of view were indicted and scandalized. Many of them went to jail and were destroyed. When he was coming in as president in 1920, after Woodrow Wilson died, this guy Harding was just about to come in as president. A month before the election, this group of men had sent an engineer from California out to Russia. They had a communist revolution already. Why did they have a communist revolution? Because Russia was destabilized and wrecked by the Japanese attack, the war, anarchists whirling around there. And the chaos of this whole British operation everywhere was destroying the old relation of the U.S. with Russia. So the communists took advantage of this and took over Russia in 1917. That's why there was a Bolshevik revolution, because of British operations to destabilize the entire continent. But despite the communists being in control of Russia in 1920, Lenin, these American patriots sent a representative to Russia and met with Lenin in 1920. And they made a deal to have the United States develop eastern Russia, develop the oil and gas and coal, and have a naval base on this peninsula so we could go against the British and the Japanese. An American naval base inside the Soviet Union. And we were going to sell them $3 billion worth of locomotives and tools. Lenin agreed to this. H.G. Wells wrote against this. It was terrible. Almost the impeached by the Americans. They think it's Russia. Terrible. The Americans had terrible ideas. More people, peasants, will never respond to that. And so what happened out of this is the whole administration was blown away in the Teapot Dome scandal and the mysterious death of the president. So, I'm going to fast forward to the present. Here we are. LaRouche, my wife and I took a little tour on Saturday through New York, our old haunts. We went to a place on 14th Street where Leonard LaRouche bought his first class in April 1966, where the first class where people stayed together and said, let's form a political group. Well, we went in to see it, but we just started meeting at his house. And what LaRouche did, what we did working with him was to discard the whole 20th century history that was given. And also to look at the other sciences and arts and see what has gone wrong. Because the way the culture has been people is still in trouble. Science, the last two great inventions were nuclear science and rockets. Both of them now suppressed. Everything else was 19th century, before. So what went wrong? So we said, look, let's develop the history. Let's develop the history of man. Let's go back to Plato. Let's go back to ancient. Let's try to open up completely new history of history, because what we've done up to now hasn't succeeded in eliminating the empire. Because you got to get rid of the empire. You can't just slap them. Because it's not like we're on here and they're there and we'll be competing. One is not equal to the other. We're not compatible with them. Their objective is insane lowering of the capability of mankind to exist. And we will stop existing. We have given to the Russians, to the Chinese, to India. Now, the Russians have done that. We've done that in this movement. A picture of where we got this science, where we got the ideas that built the modern world, and a proposal for getting out of this insanity that is based on what the United States did to actually create the modern world. That's what we're proposing to do right now. Just want to make one more point, and that is, we had these meetings. We set up an organization, the labor committee, around the rich class, Benjamin Franklin, in the American experience, there were a couple of similar, not the same, but similar. Benjamin Franklin had a group around him called the Junta, the idea that became the American philosophy. With people close to him, he was the teacher, and they were all productive and creative people. Then there were two groups in the middle of the 19th century, similar. One of them was people around Henry Carey, so it was called the Henry Carey Vespers. They would meet at his house, and they were trying to take the world away from the oligarchs and to develop science and medicine and everything. And there was another group at the same time as Harris around a scientist in Philadelphia named Beisch, Alexander Gallon Beisch. He had an organization with the German mathematician Karl Gauss and Humboldt, the old man by that time, Alexander Humboldt, and Weber and others. And that was called the Mathematician Forum, a worldwide organization of science, including some people in it, but we had friends with them. And they met around Beisch, and it's fascinating that this was the character of leadership, of the real leadership, including military. That is the type of leadership that we are creating in the Revolution movement, and that we are going to intelligent people, whether they are neighborhood people, or union people, or legislators, or scientists, or people in the intelligence community or the world. We're doing that now. We've been doing that for years. Many Revolution did this in 1982, 83. And we proposed breaking out of the whole era that happened after the death of Roosevelt, by having the U.S. develop laser beams to shoot down missiles and share that with Russia. That was the strategic plan of the revolution. We also went to Mexico, met with the president there. The president was there with more gold on his desk and the president was able to back. In addition to that, the president of Mexico had a press conference. Prime Minister India went twice. Look it up on Wikipedia. What she really means. So we are now trying to bring back into existence the forward motion in the next few weeks towards this world of the future. There is right now in progress the beginning of a tunnel being built from the bottom of Spain to Morocco. We just announced a tunnel from Eritrea to Yemen. Railroads up the coast of the Persian Gulf here. Of course, there's a lot of other things going on there too, like Tower of Babel and gun running, rope running, everything else. And they just announced a tunnel from Sumatra to Bali to Java. And the Russian railway minister Yakunin announced in an article in a British paper a couple of weeks ago, that American investors want to help Russia develop this tunnel to go across from Alaska to Russia. Well, you got Alaska from Russia, they gave it to us. $7 million. So let us ring the world with high-speed trains and build the power plants and build the cities and go on to Mars using anything like this. That's our destiny. That was what we call manifest destiny. And this is where it is.
Going back to the Mexican War, wasn't this president of Mexico controlled by the British?
The British were the largest trading partner in Mexico. That means the British had effective control in Mexico most of the time. Mexicans got nominal independence in 1811 and 1812. The people who led that were murdered, executed by the Inquisition. And in 1825, the U.S. President John Quincy Adams and Secretary of State Henry Clay sent Joel Poinsett from South Carolina, who's a brilliant man, pro-science, pro-development, to Mexico as our first ambassador to Mexico. And he worked with the nationalists in Mexico to strengthen them and get them going with the protectionists, the economic nationalists, against the royalists. And the British were doing in Mexico the same thing they did in Ireland with the Catholic Church. Which perhaps goes the other way by the Catholic Church, which is to put their own people in to the church and to have them have it part of imperial control. So the British Party in Mexico, they were actually called the Scotch Party because they were Scottish Rite Freemasons. They got up a story that the American ambassador was a meddler because he was a Freemason. Now, wait a minute. The Scottish Rite Freemasons got up a story that the American ambassador was a York Mason and was trying to take over Mexico on behalf of the United States. If you try to take over a country, first of all, would you try to strengthen the nationalists in the country who would put in tariffs and build up the power of the country? No. So the British Party, in the name of the Scottish Rite Freemasons and the Catholic Church in Mexico, controlled by pro-British European oligarchs, got this man essentially kicked out of Mexico, the American ambassador. And they spread the story all throughout Mexican history that the United States is their enemy. Well, whose story is that? Under what circumstances did the United States commit aggression against Mexico? Under the circumstance when the enemies of the United States were in control of the United States. It's as simple as that. There is no other explanation for this. That's what's happened there. And when Lincoln was president, he made an alliance with the president of Mexico, Juarez, because our country was under attack by slavery, armed by the British and their warships. The British and French armies had invaded Mexico in 1861, at the same time as our Civil War. And the British Army was operating in Canada. And John Wilkes Booth went up there and met with their leaders in 1864, got their money, came back and killed Lincoln. So they were pinning us, and the Mexicans were being pinned too. Lincoln made an alliance with them. Later, Franklin Roosevelt made a direct alliance with them. We had an alliance with them too. We started actually not Mexico. The Russians helped us in the Civil War. We were allied to every country when we were the United States. If we act like Britain, we are not the United States. What's the point? According to the populists, have you heard this? King George still owns the United States. You ever hear that? Same story as we never went to the moon. Right? Same story. King George owns the United States. Oh, that's a secret story. Well, who says so? Well, King George says so. Is that populism? That's the kind of idiocy that is spread directly by the British and so we're up to right now, yeah.
Now, LaRouche is saying that we should go and colonize parts of Mars that developed it. I'm just wondering if the British Empire is thinking of extending its empire to Mars, if they could get there. In other words, if they got there first and established regions there, they could say that the U.S. cannot go there because this is our territory. I'm just
That's a serious question because it's not like the British invented empire. Empires have been with us since forever. And does that mean that they will always be with us? Polio was with us forever too. Maybe we can get rid of that. Right? The British, it's an interesting problem. Physically, the British can't do anything. The Russian railway minister pointed out that if you wanted to develop railways, don't use the British model, because they just collapsed all the railways with privatization. And it was people who were stooges for the British, like that guy that has a statue in front of Grand Central Station, Vanderbilt. He collapsed the railroads. He never built any. The Erie Railroad was built by New York City. Governor Seward, a follower of John Quincy Adams, took an army engineer and state money and built the Erie Railroad. These pigs took these railroads over and destroyed them. That's what the British and their friends did everywhere. They never built anything. They can't build a rocket to go to the moon. They destroyed our space program. They shut it down. They sent out these stories that it's bad for you to spend this kind of money. And the baby boomers ate it up. They said, oh, yeah, let's go back to nature. But that's the British business. But, yes, they could spread this at any time in the future. This poison. How do you overcome that? You have to have an idea of man that is more powerful than what we have now, that we have had at certain times in the leadership of mankind, and that has inspired people. The idea of Prometheus and the kind of the way of life. For example, the people that developed our railroads and developed our steel mills and our canals also set up the symphony orchestra. Why did they do that? They did that in our big cities later, too. These globalists, what do they do down in Mexico? And the so-called, they didn't take our jobs and put them in Mexico. They closed our jobs, and they just set up hellholes in Mexico and put parts together. They didn't build any cities there. They didn't build anything. So, if you want to have a generation that is capable of defending itself and carrying out this kind of mission to go to Mars, to do a rocket that can get up to the speed of light in, what is it, about I don't know, a few weeks you get up to the speed of light, you accelerate faster.
186,000
Why not?
miles.
You get close to it. You don't want to go that fast on Mars, because you go there in about a week and a half if you keep accelerating at only a 1G equivalent. But these kinds of programs, to have them succeed, you have to bring the people that are now out of work, uneducated, mostly destroyed in our country, like black kids in Detroit, and people, American Indians, other people that are in ruins. You have to have not only jobs, but you have to have training programs. That has to be massive.
I want to ask some of the schematics of going to Mars issue. The Earth has a magnetic field that keeps its atmosphere from being blown off by the solar wind from the sun. If we hypothetically did make an atmosphere on Mars by melting the glaciers or whatever, melting the ice to allow there to be water and even populating the planet, we still have no way of preventing that atmosphere from being blown off by solar wind unless we made an artificial magnetic field on Mars. And that's my the question that keeps irking me is that we will never be able to comment Mars unless we give it a magnetic field, like make its core molten metal that can create a magnetic field.
Don't other planets have atmospheres?
They do, but
Many planets have atmospheres, right?
Mars that doesn't have it.
Well, Mars doesn't right now.
Because much of solar wind would blow it off if there was an atmosphere like the Earth.
But most of the planets have atmospheres. Venus has none. Yeah, it's comparable to Mars.
But Mars is being blasted solar wind. Well, might have been. There may have been life at one time.
There may have been. There's certainly water there.
Yeah.
We have to make the effort. One thing that you have to consider. I can't answer that question.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Answer that question about the magnetic, about both the relationship of the magnetic.
It gives you the philosophic idea of just going to Mars.
But consider the magnitude of what we have to do. First of all, we have a problem that present conditions on the Earth are not necessarily always going to be here. Sometime they're going to change their bursting figure, way in the distant future. Plus, there's emergencies that come up, like happened maybe to the dinosaurs, whatever. We want to be able to have the capability of having other homes for human beings. And so we can't live on the moon except under a dome. It's a sterile environment there. Mars has many elements of a life-bearing world.
Everything we need.
Some of the immense problems that we have to solve, the first one that we've been discussing recently, is that it takes, if you go, to get out of the Earth's gravity, you have to go 7 miles a second. That's escape velocity. You shoot something 7 miles a second straight up and keep going. Less than that, it'll fall down. You go 5 miles, about 18,000 miles an hour, it'll go into orbit. 25,000 miles away. The moon is 250,000 miles away. That's a 10-hour trip. You don't go straight. You either go in orbits and so forth for about 3 days. If you go that speed with a chemical rocket, blasting, getting away from the Earth and just blowing, it'll take you 8 months or a year to get to Mars. Weightless. Destroy your body, destroy your mind. Not a practical factor. You're not going to ferry people back and forth under those circumstances. Men, women, and children, and supplies and so forth. So you solve the weightlessness and the time in the same way. You will project them. You go at a constant acceleration. You know how when you accelerate in a car, you do that? So the rocket's pointed that way, and the floor is down here. The point of the rocket towards Mars is this, and the car is pressed down on the floor by constantly accelerating. So you get to a certain point close to Mars, you turn it around, and you decelerate. You still have that push down. So the pushing down is the equivalent of gravity. You calibrate it exactly so it's the equivalent of 1 G, first law of gravity. And by accelerating at that rate, up into the millions and millions of miles an hour, you get there in a week or 10 days. A chemical rocket can't do it. You have to put a million tons of fuel in the rocket until you get off the ground, right? So you have to go to the moon and get the fuel that's there called helium-3. It's an isotope that's on the moon. You can use that as a fuel for a fusion rocket, a fusion reactor. That's the process of the nuke and the nuclear and the thermonuclear bomb. That's the process in the sun. Fusion. Instead of having a reactor, we're working on it. We're going to have in various places around the world. You need a rocket that gets you there really fast. These kind of things, if you do these things, you develop really fast the capability, all kinds of capabilities for helping you get right now. For all metal industries, for all mining, for all development of labor power, for mental leaps and inventions of all kinds. Think what we were doing before this disaster after the death of Franklin Roosevelt. Political and moral disaster. We were a nation of inventors. People came in, blacks from the South, people from the Caribbean, people from Europe, went up to Detroit, went to Chicago, got a job. People were inventing everything. Some of that story is twisted over there, how that all happened. Right? But nevertheless, we did do these things. We were a whole, this was fantastic development. Everything here was invented, airplanes were developed. Why just was made people? We got from nothing. Why can't we do that kind of thing again? So, yes, you should be in touch with the people who are doing this, and I'll try to,
I don't see how you can get to Mars in 2 or 3 weeks. What about the tremendous distance?
It's 250 million miles, let's say, something like that. It's different distances depending on how the Earth and Mars are aligned going around, right, in orbit. At certain points in the orbit, then it's going to be a shorter distance, but it's still 10,000 times as far as the moon is. We went to the moon. When you're in outer space, you can accelerate. There's nothing stopping you from accelerating. Just step on the gas and you go faster and faster. Do the arithmetic. In a short time, you build up. The first day you're going 25,000 miles an hour. We're already doing that. The second day you're going a lot faster than that. You're up into the hundreds of thousands.
But what about the friction on the vehicle?
What's that?
The friction on the vehicle.
There's no compression. There is actually, as you accelerate, it does press you back, but you only want to accelerate at a gradual rate that is the equivalent, pushing you back, the equivalent, because you're weightless, right? You get the idea? So this is another point. When we build this tunnel, you'll have the ability to send freight really fast on a magnetic levitation train. If you make a tube and take the air out of the tube, the train doesn't have wheels. They already have these kind of trains, but some of them operated in China. People know how to make them. If you take the air out of the tube, so instead of going 400 miles an hour the way they do now, they run into air resistance. So take the air out of it, they can go as fast as you want. Just keep accelerating. You can go thousands of miles an hour as if you were in outer space. Why not? Get around the world in 2 hours. You can go as fast as a rocket. Why not? You wouldn't want to do that for passengers because it'd be a lot of fun to go on a passenger trip and you could see stuff as you're going around the world. But you could do these kinds of things and continue the changes in what it means to be a human being that we had before. In the old days, what it meant, for example, right now what it means in Africa, to be a human being in Africa, is that all of the vast, unknown mineral resources, including things like uranium, and all kinds of specialty metals, forget diamonds and gold, trash like that. All the agricultural resources, different types of climates and soils, and beautiful minerals, and all kinds of other things, water resources. None of it is used. you look back in African history, you see these empires, and they were rich. Why were they rich? Well, they used what they had for their own people. Now everything is sold, and it's all exported. They can't even make anti-AIDS drugs. The outdoors wasn't threatening them. So that's our existence right now. That's insane. Why not go to the point of developing the cities and the railroad system to give farmers and workers in these countries the power to move goods, to develop new science processes, develop isotopes. We're going to run out of some minerals. We're going to have to get other concentrations of minerals that we know how to use. Like we developed petroleum and coal as new resources. You can't keep burning trees for fuel, right? We have a bigger and bigger resource base the more science we do. Well, we're not doing that there. So that Africa, which is rich, is poor and dying. Why? Only because of this crazy economic system. And the concept that it's right and it's in accord with human nature. People in each other.
I have two comments and then I have a couple of questions. But the first question, what does Al Gore threaten them with if they want to create more availability of anti-AIDS drugs?
When he was vice president, he was assigned to negotiate with South Africa. Or made himself, assigned himself or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he went there and he threatened them. And Becky was president. And he said, we cannot tolerate South Africa producing, is it retroviral?
Yeah.
We can't allow you to do this and break the patents. Because that destroys the free trade system, which depends on the sanctity of property.
Susan Rice was part of that too.
Yeah, Susan Rice, who is now our ambassador to the United Nations, was part of this deal. So these are Democrats who have this.
So I wanted to make two comments and then I have some questions for you. First of all, what to make out of this, I still don't know, but it does concern me. My dad was a part of a company, the National Association of Mutual Savings Bank for the United States, and he tried to put forth a Fair Banking Act, which a professor created a law out of Cherokee, PhD in monitoring, to take it to Congress in '72. He built the first ATM and one of the first computer scientists in the world. He was Venezuelan, and he went as doctorate on an oil scholarship in Venezuela. And he was interrogated by the CIA while he was finishing his doctorate. And my dad, being a smartass, just kind of defended him and said, yes, I had tons of plots, and gave a whole story. And then, they realized it was important, so I didn't take it. My dad, and they left him alone. In any case, he used information systems to help strengthen the banking system in Puerto Rico. He went there for a year or two. He tried in Venezuela. I don't think it did much good, but in the late 70s, early 70s, late 60s. And then, I think for Citibank, I don't know who he did it with, he went to the Mexican banks. And he was trying to give them the strength of computers to help nationalize the banking system. And within a couple of months, he got a very serious amoeba. He was ill for a year, but couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He got cancer. I just have to do it out there. The other thing is that I have a colleague who's a professor also in psychology.
You have a strong motivation to help us do all this.
Yes, I do. And she's studying a culture of distress. And I was talking to her about how much we screw over the vets, and that one of the reasons that the suicide rate is so high among these kids coming back from Iraq is that we've lied to them. And they go there and they realize that they're not there for any reason, but we claim that they've gone there. And that I found it real strange, and I called the VA and I said, look, I have two PhDs, I don't have a license, but I worked 16 years, let me help for free. And I couldn't get a phone call back. And people were gone by 2 and 2:30 in the afternoon. And I was saying, how can we help these vets if the psychologists are gone by 2 in the afternoon? What if they got a job? And she said to me, your son was in Iraq. And that he came back a disaster. And that that they overdrugged him with so many drugs that he got a heart condition and other problems from the drugs that he's never going to quite recover from, but psychologically he's coming back. And he said he can't really talk to her about what happened to him because he says there's been so much misrepresentation of what's going on that it's almost enraging, and he feels like he can't have the dialogue with the civilian. He's beginning to be able to talk, but I thought it was very intelligent that she said we pathologize the vets before we give them any vehicle to speak to each other, because then we shouldn't keep them silent.
Let's look on the positive side. What's the problem? Think about Venezuela or some of these countries right now. They're very confused. Very confused. The green agenda. Castro even took the side of Gore and global warming. What is this? This is a direct result of the British Huxley Revolution in Science and Teddy Roosevelt, who's the founder of conservation in the United States. Man cannot tamper with nature. That's Hitler's point of view. In Mein Kampf, he said that the Jews were in a conspiracy to get science to look under the skirt of Mother Nature.
They tampered with nature. That's what all that research was about STDs and oncology.
So, what is global warming? Global warming says you cannot have factories. You can't change, like people in India. Most have no electricity. So, global warming fanatics say you will never have electricity. And don't whine about it. You're going to have to die. That's it. And you know the guy that went against them in Africa, Kwame Nkrumah, was part of the American Civil Rights Movement. And then he went back to Africa and built this great dam on the Volga River and made the biggest artificial lake in the world to get electricity. The British hated that.
I just want to say that Lincoln, in one of his speeches, said right makes might. And Hitler, many years later, said the exact opposite. He said might makes.
That's right.
I just want to point that out.
That's exactly the concept. Yeah.
Just a comment and a question. Speak up. I think it's really ironic that right now it's Russia and China that are leading this four powers agreement when they were the two nations that were using the communist system. And I was hoping that maybe you could explain the main differences between the American system and communism, because I know that Carrie had an ongoing relationship through the editorials in different newspaper magazines in the 1860s, 1850s. And if you could explain, like, what are the main differences other than what I know of the American system?
Okay, that's a very good question. Let's end this with that.
Okay.
In the 1870s, Henry Carey and his friends developed the most important labor movement of American working people. It was called the Knights of Labor. And one of their inner circle, Terence Powderly, who was mayor of Scranton, Pennsylvania, became the main organizer, the leader of the Knights of Labor. And they recruited unemployed, employed, black and white, immigrants and natives, women and men, to this labor organization where they taught people American system economics, nationalism. He identified Standard Oil as a foreign corporation. And so this was their point of view. Now, if you look at history and politics in history, in the dynamic of the development of the world, such as we see here, we're in a fight. Are we going to develop it or are we going to be crushed worldwide? You can go to several sources of socialism. One source of it is Karl Marx, operating in England, pinned down in England, mentally and physically. He's being paid by Engels, a British cotton capitalist, who hates the United States like the rest of the British. Marx is somewhat better on that question than he is, but he doesn't have a clue about the history of the United States. He doesn't understand. Marx is saying that the British are changing India to the better. He said they were hurting.
Iroquois was also involved?
Yeah, Iroquois. I don't want to, this is not all about Karl Marx. There were also socialists and communists who joined working people and other people, intellectuals and others, who joined that and similar movements, who were not Karl Marx, who were not British agents, and who were people that had other agendas, good and bad. Some of them worse than Marx. Anarchists who were British stooges, and other people, or anarchists who weren't British stooges, maybe even worse than the crazier. They were all throughout Europe. They were working people that joined socialist groups and socialist unions, and they had different kinds of agendas. During the lead up towards World War I, when the British were pushing for all the countries that we were allied to fight each other, to try to break up the American alliance, they wanted to get a great war, a catastrophe. The socialist movement, you could say, in the world could be divided into three different pieces. One piece was the Bolsheviks. They're in Russia. They've got their thing with Lenin. They're really mixed up on history, on economics. They're also running a country. So Lenin became the head of state. All kinds of new problems. And it got worse under that Soviet system. Then you have socialists like Eugene Debs in America. He's a labor leader, railroad union leader, led strikes in the railroads, and he's a socialist, but he is a follower of Schiller, not Marx. He loves Schiller. That's his model. And he is a friend of Terence Powderly, who's a Catholic, and who's actually they got a pope. We helped to get a new pope in there to back this labor movement up, Pope Leo XIII. Debs was put in jail by the U.S. government, allied to England, for imposing World War I. So you had people like him in Australia and in other countries. They were socialists, but they were really nationalists. They were patriots. They were trying to save mankind from being destroyed. They didn't know the whole history of this thing. They hadn't learned the things that we know about. They knew a lot of it, though. They went against Wall Street in London. There were also people in the Irish movement that were on the fringes of this, but they weren't really socialists, but they sounded like socialists in many ways. They weren't socialists. Jeremiah O'Leary and other people. Then you had another group in the socialist movement, a guy named Connolly in Ireland, and similar types in Germany and elsewhere, who were real, authentic pigs representing the British Secret Service. And to them, socialism meant anti-Western, anti-American, pro-war, pro-imperial. This is in so many ways. You ever hear of the Austrian School of Economics? Sure. That's their kind of socialism. A world government to make sure there's no nationalism, to stop all tariffs. And they say, well, we're anti-capitalist. Hayek, the last chapter of his book, Roach's Servant, he's supposed to be for free enterprise and private property. His last chapter says, in order to make sure we have free enterprise and free trade, we have to have a world police state to stop any country from protecting its borders and protecting its production and raising wages without any government interference. So we need a world police state with military force to smash any government that tries to protect its people.
That's familiar.
So, but that's that kind of socialism. That's H.G. Wells' kind of socialism. He was a socialist who taught Corliss Lamont, the son of Thomas Lamont, the Morgan player. He taught him to be a slave. So that's British. So it's a complex question. We have friends who identify themselves as communists, even today in Eastern Europe, and as socialists.
That's why
There's people all throughout India and other places that identify them in different ways as socialism. There's socialism of the British Fabian Society. George Bernard Shaw was a eugenics race fanatic. And he praised the Houston Stewart Chamberlain book, said this is the master of history. He knows all history. He's the one feeding the ideas of the people like Roosevelt and that kind of thing. These people are real pigs. That's the enemy. That kind of socialism is the enemy. What is it? It's the empire. It's the predatory view against Zeus over mankind. And that's not God. Okay, so let's take a break for a moment.